So, back in the 50s, there were these two Catholic cardinals that lived in Eastern Europe. There was Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński of Poland and Cardinal Joseph Mezzensi in Hungary. And these two guys disagreed about absolutely everything, but both of them were doomed to live the prime of their lives under communist, Stalinist rule. The way that they went about their discussions with the people that they were underneath and the people that they were trying to help were very, very different. Cardinal Mindszenty was always front and center, the voice of the people, voicing his displeasure continuously about the regime. And Cardinal Wyszyński was always more in the background, working in the shadows, trying to have conversations with everyone who was involved in the situation. Both of them were talking. Both of them were sharing their feelings. Both of them wanted the same thing, which was to get rid of freaking Stalin. Okay? But in the end, both countries were eventually freed. Cardinal Mindszenty died in 1970 while seeking asylum in an embassy, and Cardinal Wyszyński lived to see his Polish protege, Karol Wojtyła, or Pope John Paul II, become the Pope of the Catholic Church. They went about it in different ways. They both had really, really excellent ideas, and they both communicated them very, very effectively. So how do you mediate this kind of discussion? Are you a Mindszenty or are you a Wyszyński? And when you encounter the other side of an argument, how do you react? And that's really what I wanted to talk to you all about today. Free discussion is the very life of truth, says Thomas Huxley. One of the problems that I see when I look out into the world today is that we have this very, very polarized population, possibly unparalleled in its polarization in American history. And we've gotten to the point where we just have stopped speaking to one another. We've gone into our little caves where we know what's right, and we listen to people who tell us what we know is right. And we go and we talk to our friends, and they tell us that we're right for feeling the way that we feel. Our side is good. The side that we don't believe in is evil. And why on earth are they acting like that when it is so evil to be on that side? It's very, very frustrating to have a conversation anymore. It's filled with name-calling and labeling and judgments based on the kind of news that we can read from a soundbite or a meme on the internet. And this is the kind of thing that I wanted to speak today to try to instill within each and every one of you a way to change it. Step one, realize that you don't know everything. I know, it's pretty difficult. We all know everything, right? I mean, we've lived somewhere between 14 and 30-some, 50-some, 60-some years on this planet. And we've acquired a lot of knowledge. We've acquired a great deal of personal experience on this earth. We have seen injustice. I'm certain that we have. We've all been victims of injustice. No question. Okay? Some of us are luckier than others. Some of our problems you'll look back out and smile, and some of these problems are probably going to stay with us for the rest of our lives. Okay? Not everybody can approach these kinds of conversations the same way. But there's one thing that is absolutely true of every single one of us, and it's that we don't know everything. And we never will. Today, there's more information that comes out in 5 minutes on the internet than probably came about in the first 1,000,000 years of the existence of Homo sapiens. Okay? It's pretty hard to keep track of all of it, and it's really, really difficult to disseminate what's true from what isn't true. That's going to lead us to step 2. Know some things. Hear me out. It's very, very important that you actually do some research before engaging in arguments. Going on Twitter in the morning and seeing what memes your favorite political commentator posted is not research. Okay? All that you're going to do is make things worse. Because you are going to be more polarized. You are going to be convinced that it is your side that is right and that there is no other side that is worth listening to. It's what we call confirmation bias, right? So we're all in search of that. It's nice and warm on our side. Okay? It's much, much easier not to go out into the wilderness to realize that other people are going to have different perspectives than we ourselves have. So step one, learn history. Jamie told you that I'm a history major. I was. And history is probably the thing that I think about and that I care about more than anything else. When I talk to people, most of the time my adult interaction is at child's birthday parties, because my daughter is 7. And so I'll meet like a couple other parents and I'll talk to them about their experience with social studies in high school. And they're like, oh yeah, my teacher was terrible. I don't remember anything and I don't care to learn anything new. And I'm like, darn it, come on. Like, you're having this discussion, like, how can you have this discussion? How can you have these opinions if you have no idea what happened in the last several thousand years and how we got to where we are now? Know some history. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to the society that you're a part of. Number 2, learn how the government actually works. You know what would be awesome? If my side elected a dictator that did every single thing that I ever wanted to do. Okay? Guess what that does not exist in? America. Okay? If you want to live in America, you have to live in a political system that is bound by the U.S. Constitution. There are going to be things that you don't agree with in the law. And all of you had to read Antigone in 10th grade, and you had this big discussion about, you know, God's law versus man's law versus society versus me versus what I learned on the internet. Okay? And those things are all going through our heads all the time. Like, how does the government actually work? What can we follow? What can we fight against? Okay? We need to figure out how we can live in the country that we live in and expect to make reasonable changes. We can dream, but we live where we live, and that's going to be limiting in some way. The third thing, you should research what you agree with. If you're going to have any hope of winning any argument that you're in, you better know more than what a meme can tell you. Okay? You should read just about every day something that's going to help bolster your causes. Or else why should anybody talk to you, and certainly why should anybody listen to you if all you're going to do is spout one-liners? But the other thing, the thing that's much, much harder, is that you need to research what you don't agree with. Every morning, I force myself when I wake up. I go down the line on my toolbar on my laptop, and I start with neutral news, and then I move on to liberal news, and then I move on to conservative news. And that's my plan, is I force myself to read everything that I can that's out there. And I've picked out 5 or 6 websites that I feel like is going to give me that accurate picture. And then I move on with the rest of my day from there. And if I encounter somebody who wants to have a conversation, which is obviously my goal in giving you this speech today, I have some ammunition where not only do I know what I'm probably going to be fighting for, but I probably know, at least in some way, what the person who I'm disagreeing with is going to care about. And that is the ingredient that I think we're missing, is that we're not taking into account, in many cases, what the person who we're disagreeing with is going to be caring about. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do that. Discover some shared humanity. This is really, really hard, and it's going to take some practice. And if the other person who you're talking to is not as open-minded as you are, which is probably going to be true, it's going to be difficult sometimes to find some things in common. Now, this is just like diplomacy 101, right? You're going to say, my people tell the same story, right? We find something that we have in common, something that probably doesn't have anything to do with politics. If you start a conversation by just being like, you know what? You're a racist. That conversation is not going to go anywhere. Okay? Everyone I don't like is Hitler. A Child's Guide to Online Political Discussion. If you don't want to have a conversation, that's a good way to start it. Being like, hey, you're Hitler. Okay? Nobody will ever want to talk to you again. Okay? So you have to find something in common. Oftentimes, if I'm in a conversation where I disagree with somebody, and this has become something that I actually really have come to enjoy, whether it's online with a stranger or in person with somebody that I've just met, or somebody that I've known for years, finding something in common is usually the first step. And I'll often say, hey, I agree with this, but I don't necessarily agree with this. It's kind of cheating if you don't tell the person that you're talking to, hey, I actually disagree with you. And I think that you're also doing a disservice to yourself. So if somebody says, you know what, I really hate X, and they go off about X for like 10 minutes, and you're just like, yeah, that's probably a disservice to that conversation, because they think that you're agreeing with them, when in fact, you should probably be standing up for your beliefs and educating that person. That's hard to do. A lot of us like to avoid conflict, and this is really inviting it head on. So reveal that you disagree. You also want to say, I'm interested in talking to you about this. Be genuine about it. I understand that you feel differently than me, and you have probably very good reasons that through your life experience have taken you to this point. But I would love to learn what those are. And the more genuine you are about that, the better your conversations are going to be, and in the end, hopefully, everybody is going to leave a better person that's going to leave a better imprint on the world. Now, maybe I'm an optimist, and I'm certainly sure that I am, but that's the way that these conversations are going to begin. That is the gateway to real change, whether you are Cardinal Mindszenty or Cardinal Wyszynski. Step 4, and this is super hard. We are terrible at this as a species. Listen. I'm guilty of it too. I talk over people all the time. It feels awful, and I can hear myself doing it. But I'm waiting, not listening. I'm waiting for my turn to speak. And that's something that I'm still working on, and I'm sure that it's something that we're all still working on together. Now, that's really the core of what we really need to start getting better at if we're going to have good conversations about things with which we disagree. The first step is the hardest. Let them speak. Let them finish speaking before you start speaking. Actively listen. Make eye contact. Stay off your phone. Find something that you can agree with. Okay? One of the hardest things that you can possibly do in this era of sides is to say, okay, I agree with this part of what you just said. Okay? That's something that they probably thought that everybody on your side was a mindless, brainless zombie who only listens to what the news station that they watch is telling them. But if you say, you know what? I actually think that what you're saying there, like, I disagree with that too. I don't think that that's right. I think that it's the responsibility of people like me on my side to change that for the better. And I think that that's going to bring us closer together. That person is going to come talk to you, and that person is going to keep talking to you, and they're going to trust you. And that's something that we really need right now. After that, you validate that you hear their opinion. You don't have to agree with what they're saying. In fact, like I said earlier, you're lying if you fully say that you agree with them, just for the sake of making the conversation comfortable. You say, look, I disagree with you. It is against my core values, what you are saying to me right now. But I hear you. And I acknowledge that you are saying something that you truly believe and that is very, very important to you. And that's where you start asking questions. When did you start thinking like this? Was there some kind of experience that you had in your life that made you think this way? Did you have a bad experience with this group that made you feel a little bit more extreme on this issue than I probably do? And that's how we share our humanity. They're probably going to ask you very similar questions. How did you come to be the way that you are? There's a lot of things that happen to all of us, the way that we're born, how we grew up, what we experience. Those things factor into absolutely every single person on this planet's decision-making. Everybody's experience is different. And when we travel and we meet new people, we're going to find that there are good and bad people that are all kinds of things and fit into all kinds of categories. And we need to figure out how to share that humanity and how to get everybody on the same page so we can actually make things better. And the only way we're going to do that is together, not apart. Step 5, respond respectfully. You have to acknowledge that there are differences. Some of those differences are going to be irreparable. Okay, there are issues out there that we are going to be incredibly entrenched on, that we're not moving on. And that certainly, I'm not going to win you to my side in 5 minutes of talking to you at a child's birthday party. Okay? And I have to understand that. Okay? Maybe we'll talk again. Maybe you'll leave with just one thing that makes you think slightly differently. But the only way that that's going to happen is if you acknowledge that there is a difference. And say, well, you know what? That's going to be the difference between you and me. I'm always going to believe this, because this is really important to me. And you're always going to believe this, because clearly that's really important to you. Maybe we should move on and talk about another issue. Okay? Don't start with your core beliefs that define who you are in these conversations. You start small with something you have in common, and then you work into having these more difficult, polarizing conversations. Some harder things. Don't label. If somebody says something, say racist, during your conversation, you can say, hey, not you're a racist, but hey, that idea is pretty racist. I think that we need to talk about where that idea came from and why you think that. And maybe how we can help you understand that that's probably not going to be an acceptable thing to say in a group of people. But they're never going to know that unless you tell them that. You don't call them out, by saying, that person is a racist. You say, I think that that idea could be perceived as racist. And it's something that you probably need to change and figure out some way to help them understand that that's not acceptable. Evidence, not talking points. I've talked about this a couple of different times, and I'm going to keep coming back to it. You actually need to know things. You need to know what you know, and you need to know what they're probably going to know, and you need to be able to use those two things together, synthesize those ideas, come up with things that you have in common, acknowledge those things that are different, and back it up with real evidence. If you really want to win an argument, if you really want the end result to be conversion of the person who you're arguing with, okay, you have to do it with evidence. Nobody is ever going to respect you if you use certain partisan phrasing and you just call them names. If you call the president by some obscene nickname that you saw on the internet, that would be an invitation for somebody who is supporting him to stop listening to you because you're not taking the conversation seriously anymore. It might make you feel better temporarily, but it's definitely not going to lead us to great success in the long run. The last thing that I have on this slide is that there's no Schadenfreude for you non-German people. That means shameful joy. There should be no shameful joy in winning or losing an argument. Okay? What's the advantage there? You get this reward of winning, but you didn't make the world any better. In the aftermath, the bad, you're probably not going to convert somebody within meeting them for 5 minutes, but you've probably made more progress than just about anybody else has in talking to that person about where they're really coming from. The good is that both of you are going to walk away with perspective, and that's going to bring us closer together, and that's going to make the world a better place, even just a little bit. Because you have acted like a decent human being. So in the end, what we should all try to do is make the best of this information and make America talk again.